today to do my first part of my March wrap-up, because I have decided to split up my wrap-ups in two so that I will do one every 14 or 15 days. And that's because my monthly wrap-ups are way too long, so I would like for them to be a little bit shorter. During the first 15 days of March, I read 7 books. The first book is a book that I actually finished on the very last day of February, but I didn't get to include it in my February wrap-up, and that is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. Now, it's been some time since I finished this, but I do remember that I wasn't as impressed with it as people seem to be with this story. It is about a couple living in Canada who one day stumbles across a diary, and this diary is written by a girl in Japan who wants to commit suicide. And then we follow this couple as well as this diary, because the couple naturally reads the diary and they gradually realize what this girl is all about and what her story is like. That is a very interesting concept. However, it's not something that I haven't read about before. And also, the diary wasn't as heartfelt as I thought it would be. And don't get me wrong, I still find it very interesting, very brutal, but it didn't leave an impact on me as I hoped it would do. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I still highly enjoyed it. It just wasn't anything impressive in my opinion. However, the next book I read was very impressive, and that is Deathless by Katherine M. Valente. This is a retelling of Russian folk tales, and alone for that I was a bit hesitant to actually read it, but I decided to eventually pick it up, and I'm so happy I did. I was afraid that this was going to be very confusing because I don't know a lot about Russian folk tales, but it wasn't. I still was able to see all the connections between this story and classic fairy tales, and I really enjoyed it. And also, when I started reading, I had to find a pencil because I had to highlight a lot of things. I think this is one of those books that I have highlighted about 30 or 40% of, because I just really love the writing. I can tell you that it's about Maria, I think that's her name. Maria lives in Russia with her 3 sisters and her parents. She grows up and she sees her 3 sisters meeting a man and being married off. Maria feels very lonesome at last, and she wants to meet a man as well. She does meet a man, and this man is very peculiar and interesting. I'm not going to say who it is, but he takes her on an adventure, and it is quite an adventure. I was so impressed with this book, and as I said, I love the writing style. I love how Katherine M. Valente combines this modern tale with the classic fairy tales. Even though I don't really know all of the Russian fairy tales at all, I still really enjoyed this book, and I gave it 5 stars. The next book is also a book that I rated 5 stars, and I had the most amazing period of reading during that week. That is The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Seven. This is the Danish version. I actually already did a full video review of this book, so I'm not going to go too much in depth with my thoughts on it, but basically it was phenomenal. If you like reading about books, and if you like reading about people who love books, then this is definitely the book for you. Afterwards, I picked up Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and I had never read this book. I haven't actually read a lot by Jane Austen, so I was curious to actually pick this up. And I thought that March would be the perfect month to do so, because people say that this is a perfect tale for the month of March. And I really liked it. This is, if you don't know already, a story about a family with a lot of sisters in it. And these sisters are very eager to meet some men and get married off, preferably to a very wealthy man. We then follow these sisters, but primarily we follow Elizabeth, who is our main character, and who kind of has a different personality when it comes to these sisters, because she doesn't take herself too seriously, she doesn't take men too seriously, she likes to just have fun and be with her family, and she's not too eager to meet a man. But of course she does, and yeah, that's all I'm going to say. This was really good because even though it has its slow passages, I still felt like it was a very interesting story about how people can change and how they can change their views on each other. And I think that's very important because this happens all the time. And therefore I ended up giving this one 4 stars. And then the next book I picked up is The One You Left Behind by Jojo Moyes. And this book is actually part of my March book haul, so I will show you the book in my March book haul as well. This one is about 2 time periods. We follow 2 women. One is living during the First World War in France, and the other one is living in London in 2006, I think it is. Or maybe it's just 2015. I think it is 2015. What do these 2 women have in common? That's the big story. Basically, we follow the first woman from the First World War during the first 140 pages, so we don't get to know anything about the other woman until after that. But I loved that because I like getting to know my characters thoroughly before we move on to other characters. So that was an aspect of this book that I really liked. Also, the first woman's story was very interesting. As I said, she lived during the First World War. Her man is sent to war, so she lives alone with her family and her sister in this French village. And German has already invaded this French village, so they are living under very harsh conditions. And then we get to meet the other woman who lives under totally different conditions. She lives in London in modern times, and I'm not going to tell you what these 2 women have in common, but of course they do have something in common, and I really like this story. I have a thing about Jojo Moyes. He writes these heartbreaking stories that really touch you, and for that I gave this book 4 stars. Then I picked up Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This is a book that I read together with Amanda from My Secret Book Club, and I really wanted to read this book with Amanda because I felt like this was a story that you have to discuss with someone. This is basically the story of a man in his 50s, I believe, who falls in love with a very young girl of 12. And that girl is obviously called Lolita. So this is a story about forbidden things, and that alone made me very intrigued to actually read it. I have watched the movie several years ago, but I didn't quite remember it, so this was a new story for me. I will have to say this was very hard to get through. Even though I read a lot of classics, this one was very dense, and that's because the writing style is very much impressionistic and also not very dialogue based, so we don't get a lot of dialogue. A lot of it is about the main character's thoughts and him trying to explain himself and his feelings towards this girl. And honestly, those explanations freaked me out a little bit because I didn't like him. I didn't like these thoughts and feelings, so I didn't want for him to justify himself towards me. The story in itself was interesting, but as I've already said, it also creeped me out a lot. I still don't get how he could fall in love with this very young girl. She wasn't even a young adult, she was a child. And I was just horrified at some passages. So all in all, because of the very dense writing style and because of the creepy subject, I decided to give it 3 stars. And then the very last book I have to talk about is Miss Blackpool by Nick Hornby. Now this one is called Funny Girl in America and in Great Britain, so this is just the Danish translation. I already did a full video review of this book because it comes out in Denmark in March, so I'm not going to go too much into detail with what I think of it, but let me just tell you, this was a funny read. It is about a funny girl and it is quite funny. And I really enjoyed the fact that it deals with the 1960s in a very interesting way. It's kind of a pastiche of that time period. I also like the fact that this book comes with pictures. I didn't mention that in my video review, but it does. So we have these pictures that kind of illustrate the sketches from that time, the sitcoms. One of the most interesting ones is this one, because this perfectly describes this time period. This is what our main character is supposed to look like. Blonde with big boobs and very smiling. And I really like these pictures because they enhance the story, and I gave this book 3 stars. And that's it for the first part of my March wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the books that I just talked about. I will be back again in the end of March with my second part of this wrap-up. And until then, have a great day everyone. Bye bye!